Good morning, everyone. How are you? Hope you're enjoying this beautiful day if you're in New York, and if you're not in New York area, I hope it's beautiful wherever you are as well. And welcome to Ella, welcome to Kevin, Geeta, Jens, Bradley, Kyle, Yasmin, and good morning to Bante Sudaso. Thank you for offering to share the Dharma again. So we will be studying this morning the start of the Araṇavibhaṅga Sutta, which you can find the link, I believe, at the top of the live chat. And welcome to Mark as well. All right, so we can start now.
Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Buddhang dhammang sanghang namassami. Good morning, friends. So this morning we'll finish up going through the Araṇavibhaṅga Sutta, the analysis of non-conflict. So we had left off. We had just finished the section on internal happiness. And the next section is on gossip and criticism. So just a reminder that the word being translated here as gossip is literally means secret speech. So rahovada literally means secret speech. So the distinction the Buddha here is making critical remarks about a person behind their back, and making critical remarks about them when they're present. That's the distinction he's making. It's both, in both cases, it's about critical remarks, but it's about whether or not the person you're speaking about is present. So the Buddha says, one is not to gossip, and one is not to make critical remarks about a person who is present. This is what was said. What does this refer to? Monks, when one knows that a piece of gossip is non-factual, untrue, and unbeneficial, then to the extent of one's ability, one is not to speak that gossip. When one knows that a piece of gossip is factual, true, and unbeneficial, then one is to train oneself to avoid saying it. When one knows that a piece of gossip is factual, true, and beneficial, then one is to know the proper time for saying that gossip. So he makes this distinction here of 3 layers. So the first one is the case where something is not true and not beneficial. Then we should do everything we possibly can to avoid saying it, no matter what. It's not to be done. The second case is where something is true, but it's not beneficial. In that case, we should still train ourselves to not say it. So often this does come up. We have something to say which is in fact true about somebody else, but there'll be no benefit from saying it. It's not going to help anyone get closer to enlightenment. So in that case, we should train ourselves not to say it. Again, it's still not to be done, but the injunction here is much lighter. And then finally, there's the case of something which is true and beneficial. In that case, the Buddha says one is to know the proper time. In other words, really carefully considering what's the right time to bring this up. Then the next situation, he says, monks, when one knows that a critical remark about a person who is present is non-factual, untrue, and unbeneficial, then to the extent of one's ability, one is not to speak that critical remark. When one knows that a critical remark about a person who is present is factual, true, and unbeneficial, then one is to train oneself to avoid saying it. When one knows that a critical remark about a person who is present is factual, true, and beneficial, then one is to know the proper time for saying that critical remark about a person who is present. So the same analysis. So whether the person is present or not, it's actually the same analysis of looking to see, first off, is it true? If it's not true, then we don't say it. Second, is it beneficial? If it's not beneficial, then we don't say it. Third, if it's both true and beneficial, what is the right time for bringing this sort of thing up? What is the right time for talking about this? What is the right time? the proper place, the circumstances under which it will have the most positive impact and cause the least harmful feelings. So this is something where you have to use your better judgment and really carefully examine your motives. So often we have something true to say, but our motive is not actually to help anyone. We just want to make ourselves look better, or we want to jab at somebody else, or we want to just have a bit of fun. There can be a certain enjoyability towards talking about other people. So that's all missing the point. The point is to actually really ask, what is of benefit to self and others? And what can I do in order to bring benefit to self and others? So this does mean that often we just won't say anything. Or if we do have something to say, we will be very careful and judicious about when we say it, the proper way to say it, the proper time and place to say it, and also who we speak to. So you may have something which is true and beneficial, but you know that if a certain person hears about it, then they will use it as a way of attacking the person who you're speaking of. Then you want to make sure that you don't say it in front of that person. So if you ever have doubts about these things, it's usually good to go to a wise spiritual practitioner who you trust and respect, and ask them privately, what do you think? Should I bring this up? When should I bring it up? What's the right time and place? What's the right person to talk to about this? And see what they say. See what advice they give. So it's this section on gossip and criticism. The next one is hurried speech. So here the Buddha says, one is to speak unhurriedly, not hurriedly. This is what was said. What does this refer to? Monks, when one speaks hurriedly, one's body becomes tired, one's mind becomes agitated, one's voice becomes unclear, one's throat becomes sore, and one's statements are indistinct and difficult to understand. Monks, when one speaks unhurriedly, one's body does not become tired, one's mind does not become agitated, one's voice does not become unclear, one's throat does not become sore, and one's statements are distinct and understandable. So I actually really appreciate that the Buddha includes this because it's very practical. He's pointing out that one of the major causes of conflict is misunderstanding between people. So if we speak slowly and distinctly, then it will be much easier for us to understand each other, which then means there's going to be less conflict arising. There's going to be less misunderstandings, less issues coming from that misunderstanding. And also he emphasizes the fact that when one speaks in too quick and harsh of a way, then that wears out your own body and mind. It makes it uncomfortable for you. And when we are uncomfortable physically, then we tend to get a little bit grumpy, which also tends to spark conflict. Another thing is that when we speak in a very quick and rough way, then even if what we're saying is not harsh, it often feels coarse and grating and uncomfortable for the listener. So also speaking a bit more slowly and clearly also can help establish the right tone for the listener so that the listener doesn't get upset or bothered. So one is to speak unhurriedly, not hurriedly. This is what was said and this is what it refers to. Then the next section is on regional terminology. So the Buddha says, one is not to insist on using the language of a particular country, and one is not to override conventional terminology. This is what was said. What does this refer to? Monks, how is their insistence on using the language of a particular country and the overriding of conventional terminology? Monks, in some countries it is called a dish, in some a bowl, in some a vessel, in some a saucer, in some a pan, in some a pot, in some a basin. Regardless of what it is called in those countries, one stubbornly, graspingly insists on using a particular term and says, only this is correct, everything else is wrong. Monks, it is in this way that there is insistence on using the language of a particular country and the overriding of conventional terminology. Monks, how is there no insistence on using the language of a particular country and no overriding of conventional terminology? Monks, in some countries it is called a dish, in some a bowl, in some a vessel, in some a saucer, in some a pan, in some a pot, in some a basin. Whatever it is called in those countries, one thinks, apparently these venerable ones are referring to that when they speak. And one speaks accordingly without grasping. Monks, it is in this way that there is no insistence on using the language of a particular country and no overriding of conventional terminology. So for some reason, Ayasoma is extremely happy about this section. So here the Buddha is talking about being flexible with our terminology, flexible with our choice of words. And he's giving the example of dishes, of a bowl, how in different regions, in different areas, different people might use different words to refer to a bowl. But rather than get caught up on the words that are used, we try to understand the meaning of what the person is saying and to adjust, to be flexible, not to rigidly insist on the use of one particular set of terms. And this goes both ways. So that also means that if somebody comes and they use slightly different terms than what we're used to, then we shouldn't constantly insist that they change their language to suit us. We should try to understand what they're saying and to communicate with them without trying to force them to change. Unless they ask what word do you normally use for this, then we can tell them. But not to try to force other people to change the terms they use. As long as we can communicate with each other accurately, then that's good enough. And this comes up a lot in Buddhist circles, especially in the West, where we have Buddhist traditions coming from a wide variety of different countries, a wide variety of different cultures, all of which have developed their own particular terminology. So some of it is coming from classical languages, such as Pali, Sanskrit, and ancient Chinese. Others is coming from contemporary languages, so Thai, Burmese, Japanese, and so on. And some of it is terminology that develops at a particular place. So here, for example, we have a particular language invented by Ayasoma, which has a lot of words which only make sense to Ayasoma and to a handful of people who are around her frequently. So it's just one of the aspects of this monastery is that there's a particular terminology which one starts to pick up. But that's a hyper-local phenomenon. But you'll find this at every monastery. Every monastery I've lived at, there were certain words and terms which had relevance in that monastery, but were particular to that monastery. So when interacting with others, it's important not to get hung up on these terms. An example of this many years ago, there was a monk who was using the word acharya, which means teacher in Pali and Sanskrit. And somebody else was saying, no, you must use the word ajahn. You can't use the word acharya. You must use the word ajahn, which is the Thai variation on that word. It's a Thai word which comes from that Pali Sanskrit word. And so there was this little conflict which arose of one person saying, no, we should be using acharya because it's the classical word. The other person saying, no, we should be using ajahn because that's the contemporary Thai word. But that's completely missing what the Buddha is saying here. Both people in that case were in the wrong because both people were insisting on the use of a particular term instead of just recognizing that the other person clearly meant the same thing. So again, especially when dealing across Buddhist traditions, across Buddhist cultures, trying to understand the meaning of what's being said, and relating to people based on the meaning of their terms, rather than getting caught up on the specific words being used. This also comes up a lot when dealing with people who don't have the same first language. So here at Buddhist Insights at Empty Cloud Monastery, we're used to dealing with a very international crowd of people. So people who come from a lot of different countries, who have a lot of different native languages. So that means that we're all using English in a bit of a different way. So it's necessary to not get hung up on that, but instead make an effort to try to understand what people mean, and to use the words which another person will understand and relate to. So one is not to insist on using the language of a particular country, and one is not to override conventional terminology. This is what was said, and this is what it refers to. And then the Buddha summarizes. He says, monks, devotion to the elation that arises from pleasure that is connected with sensuality, which is inferior, the behavior of villagers, the behavior of commoners, ignoble and unbeneficial. This phenomenon brings suffering, infliction, anguish, and fever. It is the wrong practice. Therefore, this phenomenon brings conflict. Monks, non-devotion to the elation that arises from pleasure that is connected with sensuality, which is inferior, the behavior of villagers, the behavior of commoners, ignoble and unbeneficial. This phenomenon is free of suffering, free of infliction, free of anguish, free of fever. It is the right practice. Therefore, this phenomenon is free of conflict. So at this point, the Buddha goes through all the categories that he went through in the sutta, and for each one he gives this same analysis. So the wrong practice brings conflict, and the right practice is free of conflict. So then commitment to self-torment is the wrong practice and brings conflict. Not being committed to self-torment is the right practice and is free of conflict. So following the Eightfold Path is the right practice and therefore is free of conflict. Engaging in flattery and disparagement instead of just teaching Dhamma, it's the wrong practice and it brings conflict. Again, you can quite clearly see this. When we flatter some people and disparage other people, then that ticks people off. That makes people quite disturbed and upset. On the other hand, if one just teaches the Dhamma, then that's the right practice and that's free of conflict. Now, it's hard for people to argue with. So if you just say, well, the Buddha said X, Y, Z, the suttas say X, Y, Z, this is the Dhamma as it is, then there's no problem. But if you say, you are practicing wrongly, he is practicing rightly, this is the correct way, and you are wrong, then of course that's going to piss people off. So not engaging in that kind of flattery and disparagement, but just teaching the Dhamma. And letting people figure out for themselves. Again, it's a bit different if someone directly asks. If someone directly asks, am I practicing rightly or wrongly? What should I do? Then you can just tell them. But otherwise, we should try to teach the Dhamma without getting into direct flattery or disparagement. Then the Buddha says there is sensual pleasure, dirty pleasure, vulgar pleasure, ignoble pleasure, which is the wrong practice and brings conflict. Then there's the pleasure of renunciation, seclusion, tranquility, and awakening. This is the right practice and is free of conflict. And he goes through the analysis on gossip and critical remarks. So if it's not true and not beneficial, then it brings conflict. If it's true but not beneficial, then it brings conflict. If it's true and beneficial, it's free of conflict. Of course, you still have to be careful about using the right time. You can say something that's true and beneficial, but you say it at the wrong time, and you'll probably cause conflict. So in monasteries, at Abhayagiri anyway, we used to say The worst time to admonish someone is right before lunch. So just keeping that in mind. Never criticize someone right before lunch. Wait until after lunch. Things usually go much better after lunch. There is hurried speech, which is the wrong practice and brings conflict. There is unhurried speech, which is the right practice and is free of conflict. There is insistence on using particular terminology. That's the wrong practice and brings conflict. There is not insisting on using particular terminology. That is the right practice and is free of conflict. And the Buddha summarizes, therefore, monks, this is how you are to train. We will understand phenomena that bring conflict, and we will understand phenomena that are free of conflict. Having known phenomena that bring conflict and phenomena that are free of conflict, we will practice the path of non-conflict. Monks, the gentleman Subhuti practices the path of non-conflict. This is what the Blessed One said. Satisfied, the monks delighted in the Blessed One's speech. So this little random statement about Subhuti at the end is interesting because Subhuti shows up only a handful of places in the Pali Canon, and there's no explanation as to why the Buddha singles him out here. But apparently he was particularly good at avoiding conflict. So that's the end of the sutta. At this time, if there's any questions or comments, we can go ahead and take whatever questions and comments you might have.
Sadhu, sadhu, sadhu. Thank you, Bhante. This sutta is beautiful. Marielle says, what a lovely sutta. And also Stan jumped as a demonstration of excitement and approval. And hello to some more friends. Hello to Galaxy from Malaysia, and Dan and Yanni, Sally, Liz. Welcome to all of you, and Gita. Sally is asking how to overcome the habits of speaking hurriedly, so rooted in the habits.
Well, the first thing always comes down to the intention to change. The intention to speak more slowly and clearly. Start with that clear intention. And keep reminding yourself of that intention. And then whenever you're about to speak, just gently remind yourself, speak more slowly, speak more clearly. And then if you catch yourself speaking quickly and indistinctly, then slow down a bit. If after you say something, you realize you said it too quickly, then just remind yourself, oh, I said that too quickly. I'll try to speak more slowly next time. In these ways, you can help to encourage yourself. You can also tell the people that you talk to, you can tell them like, oh, if I'm speaking too quickly, please let me know and I'll slow down a bit. Especially if you have a history of people not clearly understanding you or people finding that you're talking too fast, then just tell them I'm trying to teach myself to speak a bit more slowly and clearly. So please let me know if I fall back in my old habits. So you can also recruit the people that you deal with to help you catch yourself in these things.
And Yan says, the Buddha's teachings are truly timeless. Akaliko, it amazes me and it's inspiring. It is indeed. And Stan is making his appearance on the altar.
Hoping he doesn't knock over those flowers.
His cameo appearance. And Kevin says, it's like Mara the evil one. Whoop. Bhante saved the altar. Great. Kevin says, curious, why do you use brackets for some of the words in the translation? For example, terminology or particular.
So the convention on translation is that when a translator is including a word which is not in the original text, to place it in brackets. So I follow that same convention most of the time. So sometimes in the course of translating something, it's necessary to include a word or sometimes even a phrase to clarify the meaning of the original text. So some translators will just include it without indicating that's an addition. And others will put it in brackets to make it clear that this is something which is not actually in the original text, but that it's being used to clarify the meaning of the words. So you can, when you're reading a translation, if you come across something in brackets, you're welcome to ignore it, pretend it's not there. Sometimes I do that. But it's there to help clarify the meaning of something, which sometimes it's clear in the original language, but in translation, if one translates too literally, that gets missed. But there's some debate about whether this is a proper thing to do. Some people say that this is that it can lead to translators inserting too much of their own opinions into a translation, and that is a risk. So this is, again, why the convention of brackets is used, is to indicate that this is interpretation of the meaning, which can be disregarded if the reader wishes to disregard it. Same as footnotes. Footnotes serve a similar purpose, but usually for more lengthy explanations. Brackets are just for very short insertions to clarify the meaning of something. So for example, it literally does just say insistence on using the language of a country, but all languages are the language of a country. Does that mean we should not use any language? Of course not. But the Buddha's meaning here, not to insist on using the language of a particular country, of some specific place. So that's why particular is included in brackets.
And Bradley says, the part on terminology reminds me of the dizzying array of titles in Buddhism.
Oh, it's mind-blowing. A while back, at a monastery, I came across a document which listed all the titles for monastics that are used in all the different Buddhist traditions. And it was like a dozen pages long. And I don't think it was even a complete list. It's just mind-blowing.
And Kevin says, this sutta is especially helpful for me for restraint of pen. For example, writing, example on social media, texting, and emailing. Yeah, don't we all have that tendency for hurried responses? And Dan says, thank you, Bhante, Ayasoma, and Venerable Subhuti. Early way I found Buddhism was there was a particularly difficult conflict, and I had to find solutions, very desperate. I read the Diamond Sutra of Mahayana, which doesn't seem to have anything to do with conflict, but it helped me. And then Venerable Subhuti shows up here randomly. What helped was the not making a thing out of something. You know how words can be made to be funny? Originally, someone says, we must do X collectively, which had meaning, but then over time, the word becomes funny and then collectively is used in a funny way, or as with corporate speak, agile, etc. All right, and Karen Zhu, hello, good to see you. Peace, everyone. I'm working on having conversations with folks about their actions I perceived as harmful and feel it's beneficial to share my perceptions and feelings. Any further elaboration on how to go about those combos would be helpful.
Yeah, so the Chodana Sutta, which we went through a week or two ago, the Buddha gives 5 basic bullet points to keep in mind. So first off, is it true? Second, is it beneficial? Third, is it the right time? Fourth, say it gently. Fifth, establish a mind of loving kindness before speaking. So those are your 5 basic bullet points to keep in mind. And that greatly smooths out the delivery and the response.
And James says, I hope everyone is well, that Stan is healthy, that Bante is healthy, and Aya is healthy. Bante just looked at Stan. You're all doing work that brightens and makes the day worthwhile. A real light spot for my life. Oh,
Great.
That was the last comment on the live chat. Are there any questions or other things that people want to share? If so, feel free to put them on the live chat. Bante, do you have anything else to share?
No, I think that that covers it. So, yeah, I mean, this is an important sutta, and then it gives a lot of really practical advice, about how to communicate in a way with others that doesn't bring conflict. But also noticing the emphasis the Buddha places on our own practice. He starts off with talking about practicing the Noble Eightfold Path, on not being obsessed with sensuality. He talks about the importance of practicing samadhi. So noticing also that he emphasizes our internal development of mind as being a critical aspect of non-conflict. Again, this sutta, it's very practical. The Buddha has everything in here from not speaking too fast all the way to developing the 4 jhanas. So it's a very, again, it illustrates the practicality of the Buddha, in that he understood the conditions under which people cause problems and also what we can do to not cause problems.
Yeah, I also find it interesting because also in the terminology part, it seems to me that the Buddha also kind of gives a pointer in terms of making also an effort to use the terminology and speak the sort of same language than the people that you are having a conversation with. Instead of, so I'm thinking about the Acharya versus Ajahn. So if you're in Thailand and people use the word Ajahn instead of like saying, Acharya is the oldest sort of terminology, just use Ajahn. And then if it's in another context, you can use Acharya or something else. What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I mean, it's about avoiding conflict. So if you notice everybody around you is using one word, then it's probably easier just to use that word. If you have a really good reason not to, then you can explain. So one of Ayasoma's personal crusades is to discard the word nun from referring to female Buddhist monastics. But she has quite good reasons for that. So I don't think she's just trying to stir up conflict in the Buddhist world, but rather it's something which is coming from a reasoned place. Actually, maybe you should write an article on the matter. We can post it on the website.
Sure.
Yeah. That's something is to really ask ourselves, why are we insisting on the use of a particular term? If we actually have a good reason for it, then to find an appropriate way to communicate that reasoning. But to do so in a gentle way, in a non-confrontational way, in a way of non-conflict. And much of the time, you just want to communicate. It's not necessarily about trying to change the terms that are used, again, unless there's a good reason for it, but just communicating.
And Kevin has an amusing comment. So again, following those 5 criteria, it's basically like not going to be talking much daily.
Or you just learn how to speak gently and beneficially.
Yeah, speak words of Dhamma. Actually, that's the whole point also. That, as you're saying, that how one starts realizing that most of the talk one engages with is unskillful. So then you start veering more towards talking about Dhamma.
Yeah, there's a lovely sutta where the Buddha says, when you gather together, you should either maintain silence or talk about Dhamma.
Sadhu. Yeah. And Sally is asking, is it wrong view that I thought Dhamma is more important than convention? Before, I thought as long as we contemplate anicca dukkha anatta, which leads to awakening. Sometimes ignore conventional environment won't impact too much on awakening. There is non-overriding of conventional terminology, mind blowing to me. Is it because non-conflicts are as equal important as practice on our own? What is the difference between flatter and praise? In mind, if we respect, admire someone because good qualities attract us, is this also to be abandoned?
Okay, sounds like there were at least 3 different questions there. So can we do them one at a time, please?
Is it wrong view that I thought Dhamma is more important than convention? Before I thought, as long as we are contemplating anicca, dukkha, anatta, sometimes ignore conventional environment won't impact too much on awakening.
Well, when interacting with others, you do want to be careful. You want to be careful not to unnecessarily annoy or offend people. I mean, of course, Dhamma is the most important thing, but one element of Dhamma is to avoid unnecessary conflict, because unnecessary conflict is quite disruptive to our mental stability, disruptive to our practice. And also, it's harmful to other people's happiness and well-being. So out of compassion for others and compassion for ourselves, we try to avoid unnecessary conflict. Sometimes conflict is not avoidable, and sometimes there's good beneficial reasons for doing something that leads to conflict. But we need to be careful to keep it to a minimum, because it does disturb our mind as well as the minds of others. What was this next question?
Is it because non-conflicts are as equally important as practice on our own? What is the difference between flatter and praise?
Sorry to answer the part about non-conflict. So flattery and praise. So what I get here is that the Buddha is emphasizing to praise the good qualities themselves instead of the person in particular. So saying something like, "Oh, you've got a really good understanding of the suttas. It's so wonderful to understand the suttas. It's so wonderful that you've spent the time to understand the suttas." So that's a quite wonderful thing. That's a good thing to say. So I don't see anything wrong with that. So praising somebody's good qualities and encouraging the development of those good qualities. And there was a third part to the question? Or was that it?
That was it, I guess. And Liz says, how should one deal with a friend who thrives on conflict? Leading by example has not worked.
Sometimes you just have to reduce your contact with the person. Just when they start getting into gossip mode and conflict mode, just display complete apathy. And when they're done talking about whatever it is they're talking about, then just talk about something else. Eventually, they'll pick up that you're not interested.
And Gabriella is asking, when attempting to reduce and avoid conflict, how important is it to ensure that praise doesn't become flattery when someone has very low self-confidence?
Well, again, to some extent, you have to use your better judgment here and considering what is of benefit, what does actually help people, what is supportive to someone. And that's not always as straightforward and clear as we would like. But again, when trying to build up someone's self-esteem, try to build it up on the basis of Dhamma. So helping somebody recognize their own good qualities. Because the Buddha said that we should recollect our virtue and our generosity. We should recollect our own goodness. So if somebody has a lot of goodness that they're not paying attention to, then help point out to them their good qualities so that they have the ability to recollect them and to bring them up and to think on them. So that's wholesome. You're helping somebody develop the recollection of their own goodness.
And Gabriella might have a second question. I'm not sure because it says question 1. So there might be another question 2 that is arriving. We'll see. There's no question 2, but there's question unnamed by Sally. Unnumbered by Sally. Is avoiding conflicts related to 37 factors of enlightenment in terms of right speech? This sutta is a good reminder.
It's related to right speech for sure. It's also a manifestation of compassion. And it also contributes to our samadhi practice. There's an interesting sutta in the Anguttara Nikaya, Book of the Sevens, if I recall, which has to do with before Mahamoggallana attained enlightenment, while he was still practicing. At one point, he was dozing off during meditation, and the Buddha comes and gives him some advice on how to not doze off during meditation. And one of the interesting things the Buddha says is avoid conflict with other people. And this will support your meditation practice.
In relation to dozing off?
Specifically in relation to dozing off, yeah, which I find interesting because for me, conflict contributes to
restlessness.
Yeah, contributes to agitation and contributes to aversion. But the Buddha in that sutta was saying that it also contributes to dullness and drowsiness because then we're trying to avoid looking at what's going on in our mind.
Very interesting.
Yeah.
And Yanni says, my friend has a mental instability and an attentive husband. Yesterday, she flared up and did not want to go home, saying her house has yaka who keeps biting her. As a friend, how can I give her a beneficial advice? Or should I not get involved in her conflict?
So it's quite risky to get involved in other people's issues unless you know what you're doing. So when there's an ongoing issue where someone's constantly in conflict with their spouse or partner, it's usually better to direct them to a mediator of some sort. So a trained third-party mediator. If we don't know what we're doing and we try to get involved in conflict mediation, then often we just make things worse. If you really feel like you're the right person for mediation, then you could try. But it's usually better to let a trained mediator take care of those sorts of things. Again, we don't want to make the problems worse. Also, when someone's mentally unstable, our ability to help them is significantly limited. So also recognize that there may not actually be that much you can do. And to some extent, we need to just accept that there's not much we can do. So in the meantime, be kind, be supportive, be friendly, wish well for her, gently speak words of Dhamma, but also recognize that there's actually not that much you can do. Okay?
And Gabriela is asking, is there a way to receive the sutta on receiving and giving admonishment? I don't understand what receiving.
So there's the Chodana Sutta and the, what's it called? Anupada Sutta. So we went through both recently. So those are the ones to look at. Yeah. If you send us an email, then I can give you the excerpts that we chant here at the monastery, if that's what you want.
Okay. And Mehmet says, are jhanas considered as mind objects cognizable by the mind? And is that why 5 chords of sensuality are mentioned as dangerous while the mind is not included?
I would not call jhana a mind object, except in the sense that all things are mind objects. I would call jhana a state of mind, a condition of mind.
And Karen Zhu says, can you elaborate on the practice of recollecting our good qualities in regard to the answer to the previous question? I think about flattering and disparagement.
Yeah, so the Buddha speaks about this in a number of places. So Silanusati and Chaganusati. Silanusati is recollecting your own virtue. So recollecting, I don't kill, I don't steal, I don't lie, I don't do sexual misconduct, I don't use intoxicants, and I'm kind, I'm generous, I'm respectful, and so on. So recollecting your good qualities. So the case that was mentioned was someone who has low self-esteem. Well, in that case, you encourage them to recollect their own goodness. And if they say they don't have much goodness, then point out the goodness that they have. If someone says that they don't think they're a good person, then you point out their virtue and their generosity. If they have any. If they don't have any, then that's a more difficult situation. But most people, especially in the Buddhist world, most people have some degree of goodness.
I think the confusion might arise in terms of like in this part. I think that the flattery and disparagement, people are focusing on the qualities rather than, I think the Buddha is more pointing on the sort of comparative quality, like comparing a group of people towards others. So he's saying that it's not in accordance to Dhamma. But there is no problem in either saying that some, like a particular quality of mind is wholesome or unwholesome. It's just not. So you can recollect your own goodness in terms like, I practice meditation, I am committed to morality, etc. But you don't go, well, I'm much better than all of the other people in New York City that are not practicing the Dhamma, kind of thing.
Yeah, that's a good point. So not getting caught in that comparison mind of thinking I am better or I am worse, but rather just acknowledging these qualities are wholesome and lead to awakening.
And Sally says, reflection of this great sutta. One only sees the Dhamma, does not identify with self. If with self, then we want this, we don't want that, will arise. If only see from Dhamma, we just know right from wrong. Yeah, that's great. All right. Thank you for sharing that, Sally, and thank you all for contributing to this great discussion. So I think that's all for the morning. And oh, no, it's not. Gabriella has another question. I have heard of the comparative mind and the fault-finding mind as well. What are other kinds of mindsets we might need to know about to avoid conflict?
Loving kindness. That actually solves most issues. If your mind is filled with loving kindness, then you'll have a lot less conflict in the first place. Okay.
All right. Gabriela says, sounds good, Bante. All right. Well, thank you so much, Bante, for sharing the Dharma as usual. Sadhu, sadhu, sadhu. May all beings attain awakening, and we'll see you this evening to talk about gender. Bender. All right. Have a great